Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me, the man next to me here is
the man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah, well, you know, for those who maybe are watching the video for the first time, they're like, "Oh, who's that guy?"
Who's that very good-looking guy right next to Vanessa?
Yes, my lovely co-host and husband, Omar Pozos, here with us today, as he always is, usually most episodes. I'm feeling good today. How are you feeling today, Omar?
I told you before the podcast, I think you're going to have to carry the torch today because I'm feeling a little tired, but we're hanging in there.
Yeah, you know what? I can do that for you. Well, I am feeling good today. I was telling Omar that my energy is way better today, so I'm very glad that we decided to record today of all days because pretty much the rest of this week, like earlier this week, I was down. I was not feeling my best. I was low energy, and you know, funny enough, a lot of it is what made me decide to do an episode on cortisol specifically today, because I was really thinking that how I was feeling this past week was very reminiscent of when I was dealing with a lot of cortisol imbalances. I, was in this state this week where I just was super low energy, felt like I could just sleep as much as I could sleep and still was tired. I just felt mentally and physically exhausted by even the smallest of tasks. And it was rough kind of getting through that period. But that's where it makes me kind of take that step back and remember, wow, I'm so glad that I'm not living in that place anymore. It's only the occasional thing that pops up every once in a while, kind of like my body's own checks and balance system, to where when my stress bucket does overflow, I do feel a little bit of that feeling, but then it does quickly pass.
Yeah, I think on Saturday I was a little nervous. It was 10 a.m., maybe 10:30, I can't remember. And I was like, is Vanessa going to wake up today? What are we doing? What's going on in there?
I'm normally on a normal day and time when I feel good. I'm more of a morning person. I'm an early riser, so it's an alarm if I'm sleeping into 10:30 in the morning and I'm still tired. That's not a good sign. But I also was thinking about this because I had a consultation call with a girl yesterday who she had reached out because she's getting married in a year, and she's noticed that she's just been putting on body fat year over year. And this would be surprising for a lot of people, but especially her, because she's a past college athlete. She's been incredibly active for the last 10 years, going into her 30s now. She is very, very fit, to the sense of she works out a ton. She's very active. She does keep, a good kind of overall nutrition in place. And so for a lot of people, they'd be like, what the heck? How are you possibly struggling to lose weight? Mm-hmm. And not even that, but she, knowing herself and knowing her body, she's like, I just more and more over the course of time am getting softer. She's like, I'm looking less and less toned. I'm starting to get self-conscious of my arms. I'm starting to notice that my midsection's more fluffy, and just overall, I don't feel good anymore. And so once I dug into it, I was like, okay, I think I see what's going on here. So getting a little bit of her history, she was somebody that did go through a really big breakup several years ago. That was a very traumatic kind of relationship ending. And then a few years later was COVID time period, kind of those couple years around COVID. Mm-hmm. Her work was very, very stressful. They were going through a lot of layoffs in her company. So she had a ton of work stress. And then even into last year, her work was just very, very demanding. She had a lot of work stress as well. So she went through several years of this high cortisol output, because cortisol, as we know, is our body's main stress hormone. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But through this period of time of being on this high cortisol output, eventually your body is going to get to a place where it cannot sustain that high level of cortisol output. And so what happens? It kind of almost auto-regulates by bringing your cortisol too low. That's where I found myself in a very severe low cortisol, which was really, really affecting every part of my body. But she's probably, it seems more in the beginning stages of it, where she's starting to notice the effects of it, of okay, I'm starting to put on body fat. I'm starting to feel tired when I get up in the morning, no matter how much I sleep. I'm starting to have these energy crashes in the afternoon. Just what's going on?
It's crazy too that you mentioned, obviously 2024, you're chatting with her and she's been, her body has been gone through this this fight or flight mode, if you want to call it that, since 2020, and it's taken so long for it to kind of catch up with her. It's kind of wild if you think about it.
Yeah, well, I think even longer than that, because I think her the big, really stressful period of her life around a relationship change, I think was even longer ago than that. So it's sometimes this stuff is almost like a slow burn for some bodies, and I think this is where like genetics comes in, and like your body's stress capacity is individual. I think for some people, this kind of stuff happens very quickly. I think for some people, it is just slow. It's a slow build over the course of time. And so I'm really, really glad that she is catching it early and kind of starting to put things into place to reverse the effects. And I'm so glad that we were able to have that consultation call, because I was able to give her so many tips and advice and resources. And she was like, oh my God, I feel like I have a great game plan from here. And then we're going to circle back and talk about coaching in a couple months as well, when she has even more of a foundation built. So really excited about that. But that's where I thought, this would be a really great episode for people like her, but like so many of the other women out there who are experiencing either body fat gain that doesn't really make sense to them, or they're struggling to lose body fat and that doesn't make sense to them either. And I want to explain to you from more of like an actual scientific level what is happening in your body with cortisol that might be impacting your ability to lose body fat.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more, because I'm interested just to learn a little bit more about it. But I think we get so many of those comments, questions, and just DMs that you're like, hey, I've changed nothing, but now all of a sudden my body has changed, or what used to work in the past is no longer working. So I'm excited for you to give a little bit of insight as to what could be going on, so that people get a little bit more of that foundation, like you were saying.
Yeah. And I always want to go from a place of like, I believe education is power, and I want the women out there to understand what's happening in their body and to actually be able to understand why cortisol matters, not just because they saw some like influencer share about cortisol because it's trendy right now, but because they actually understand how cortisol directly and indirectly impacts fat storage and fat burning capacity in your body. So let's talk about it. Let's dive in. So the first kind of thing I want to explain here. So when you understand the hormone cortisol, again, this being a stress hormone, we typically label it literally as like the stress hormone, because this is when you are experiencing stress. It can be physical stress, such as a workout. It can be perceived stress, such as, your boss putting a bunch of work on you. Like whatever it is, stress is stress to your body. Your body is going to emit this hormone, which is cortisol. Well, cortisol is what is called a catabolic hormone. So catabolic, and I know this, I literally put in the title of this episode that we are diving into the science of things, but I really want to explain things as simple as possible so people actually understand and remember this. Yeah, break that down,
because I've never heard of catabolic before.
Yeah, well, so in catabolism, that's not really a term that you hear that often, because we're getting into the science of our bodies here, our physiology. But I think a term that people are more familiar with is anabolic, right? Think anabolic steroids.
Okay.
So what are anabolic steroids? They help you build muscle. So anabolic is the state of building in your body. Catabolic is the state of breaking down in your body. They're opposites. You're really either in one state or the other. You're always either building or breaking down. Your body's constantly shifting between the two, but you might have a body that lives more in one versus the other. When we have a high stress output, or when we have a high cortisol output, we are going to be in a catabolic state. So we are in a breakdown state. Why is this happening? Because think of it on a physiological level of your body, which our bodies are so incredibly designed. Our bodies, when they sense stress is happening, what do you need to survive? You need to mobilize fuel. You need to have something to burn in case you need to run from the tiger for your survival. So it's not like, oh, hold on, pause, let me eat something really quick so I have some fuel to burn to run from this tiger. No, your body is saying, okay, this is where we need to break down all the stored glucose, the stored amino acids, and use this as fuel to burn. So that is what it means to be catabolic.
Interesting. It's kind of like you're going into like your reserve tank of fuel kind of thing.
Exactly. You're going into your reserves. That's a great
Thanks.
way.
I appreciate it.
That's a great way of saying it. But now, especially for women who are typically under eating, which if we have high cortisol, we are typically under eating. We do find that is kind of the trend for a lot of women who are operating on a high cortisol output. Now we are under eating, and your body is recognizing that it doesn't really have like sufficient fuel coming in. It doesn't want to burn its body fat stores. It actually wants to break down the glucose and the amino acids in muscle. So this is where you actually find that those who are chronically stressed, who have had a high cortisol output for a period of time, are having a really hard time putting on muscle and or they're actually losing muscle over the course of time and getting softer. Case in point, the girl I mentioned at the beginning of this episode who we had the consultation, she's a past athlete. She's had, years and years of building muscle. She's currently doing like really kind of intense strength training programming 4 to 5 times a week, and she is losing muscle.
So she's doing all these things and like you said, training pretty hard, and now she's losing muscle. So let me just make sure that I think I'm understanding, but let me just make sure that I'm kind of breaking it down. So again, because now her cortisol has been so high, her body's in this state of catabolism. Is that a word? Yeah. Catabolism?
Not cannibalism.
She's not eating other people.
Careful not to mistake the two terms.
Catabolic state. And so obviously her body is now breaking down muscle, and her body composition is changing, which is the reason why she's feeling a little bit softer, because now there's less muscle, more body fat that's been accumulated over time.
Exactly.
Boom.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And so now think of like the downstream effects of this. If we're losing muscle over the course of time, what else is that going to affect? It's going to affect our metabolic rate. Muscle, we've talked about this many times in the past in the podcast, but muscle burns more calories at rest than any other tissue in the body. So if we have less muscle, we are burning less calories over the course of time. So at the same time, not only are we physically looking just like our body composition is getting worse, but now we are more just like at, I guess, risk of putting on body fat because our metabolic rate is lower.
Wow.
We used to be able to maintain weight at 2,500 calories, and now suddenly we're maintaining at 2,200 and now 2,000. And it's like, it's going down even though you're still on top of your nutrition. You're still on top of your workouts.
That's crazy. I mean, and the fact that, this has been something that has been impacted over events that have happened 4, 5, 6 years ago in her lifetime, and now they're kind of catching up to her. It's kind of a wild concept to think about.
Yeah. And that's why I'm so glad we're nerding out on this, because it's so good for people to understand how this actually impacts your body. So that's kind of like the first point here. But let's talk about some
That's
other.
only point number 1.
Yeah, let's talk about
I've got more.
Let's talk about some other reasons that cortisol does impact your ability to lose weight. So cortisol actually increases visceral body fat storage in your midsection, in your tummy area, because there are actually 4 times more cortisol receptors in body fat in your belly than any other place in the body. Meaning that essentially where like what fat cells cortisol is kind of going to is going to primarily end up in the belly. And that's why like it's a very kind of trendy term right now of cortisol belly. People tend to notice that they have, a little bit more body fat stored in their midsection. And if they are also people who have been under periods of high stress. So that's where, again, we tend to see more and more body fat stored, not even just like across the whole body to where it's like, oh, okay, well, I put on a little bit weight, but like I actually, I look good. Like I have a little more curves. It's like, oh gosh, like I have a belly now that I haven't had before. It's uncomfortable. It's not fun to experience that by any means. So that's another point. I have many more on this list, so it's kind of probably alarming for some people, but this is what I enjoy talking about. So another reason that cortisol impacts you and your ability to burn body fat is that it disrupts your sleep patterns. So I know we've talked about this on past episodes before, how important sleep is for being able to lose body fat. So much of like the actual process of actually burning body fat actually happens overnight during that fasted period of time. Now, if we are not getting into good quality sleep, we will have less capability of burning body fat. Cortisol does impact your sleep directly. If we have higher than optimal cortisol at night, you're going to find that you are in this like tired but wired state. You feel tired, but then you're like, I can't actually fall asleep. That's where you tend to struggle. Or for some women, they wake up in the middle of the night and they have trouble falling back asleep. That can be high cortisol output as well. For those like me, where we had got to the point of cortisol being bottomed out all day long, we're just tired all the time, and we can sleep like a rock for like 13 hours and still be tired. But a lot of times, at least for myself, I have not actually truly studied this like anecdotally in clients' particularly, so I can't say for sure that this happens with everybody, but I know for myself, when my cortisol was really low, my quality of sleep was actually really crappy. If I looked at my Oura Ring scores, I was getting really, really low amounts of REM sleep. I was very much in like a light stage of sleep for the majority of my sleep. It helps explain why I wasn't really feeling rested from my sleep, but that also explains if we are getting worse quality sleep, we're not going to be able to burn body fat and repair muscle as well. So again, despite the fact that cortisol being a catabolic hormone, just the sleep impacts of that alone is going to affect your ability to recover from your workouts and kind of lead to this state where you have a higher risk of injury. You're finding probably you have more aches and pains over the course of time. Like you're just not recovering as well.
Yeah. And it's crazy. So like, if you think of it from like the zoomed out perspective, so for example, in this case, the girl that you were chatting with, Ness, that had these life events that happened 4 or 5 years ago. On top of that, now she's training 5-6 days a week. She's also under eating. She's not sleeping. I mean, the last thing your body's going to do is help you put on muscle and lose stubborn body fat. Like you have all of these things that are working against you. And I think the biggest misconception that I see and I hear so often are people are like, you know what, I'm just going to really, discipline myself, or I really have to eat less, or I really have to work out more. Like I'm just going to, work my way through this. And ultimately they end up burning themselves out and they're like, you know what, F this, I'm not doing it.
They dig themselves into a deeper hole.
Yeah. But it's so crazy how many just things you have stacked against you, where if you were just to figure out, what can we do to actually help our cortisol levels get to in a good place, this whole process becomes so much simpler too,
Yeah, well, I know it's so frustrating for women when you're dealing with this type of stuff. We have to fix the cortisol before we can expect our bodies to let go of body fat. And like I tell this to women a lot of times when they're coming into our program, and like I'll talk to them about what I kind of think an estimated timeline for them will look like. And I'll tell them of like, hey, we've got to get your hormones figured out first. Mm-hmm. That may mean that your body might let go of body fat as we get hormones balanced, because for some women it does. But for a lot of women, it's kind of like a step-by-step process. And we have to focus on hormones first, cortisol being a big one, and then we can actually focus on fat loss and kind of take it one step at a time. But I know how frustrating that can be for people when they're on a timeline, when they're like, but I'm getting married in 6 months. Like I have to start losing weight right away to, get into my dress measurements and like all these different things. It's hard. It's stressful. So like if you take nothing else away from this episode, start working on your cortisol now. Start balancing things now to make fat loss happen sooner than later. Yeah.
I mean, without getting into a big rabbit hole, that's very similar to what you went through in our wedding, right? And you're not feeling your best and you're like, let's just do it. Let's just get married regardless and we'll figure it out kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So some other kind of ways that cortisol impacts your ability to lose body fat. So there is actually an association with cortisol and your hunger hormones. So leptin and ghrelin are hunger and fullness hormones. I like to think of it as the way I always remember this from when I first learned this in like my basic college nutrition class was ghrelin is your hunger hormone, because it's like you start to growl. Yeah. A gremlin. Right. Or like for me, I'm like, I'll start to growl if I get hungry. So that's where ghrelin is my hunger hormone. And then leptin, I don't know. I think I just remember that one is the opposite. That one's your fullness hormone. So your hormones are going to be impacted and they're going to get dysregulated. So you're going to find that you are actually more hungry and less full when you have especially low cortisol output. For some women, when they have high cortisol output, they can find that it just like gets super dysregulated. And so like they'll find that typically when cortisol is high, they're not very hungry and they feel like they don't have much of an appetite. But then the reality is that most women don't actually like live perpetually high forever. You're kind of in big swings for the most part. Like most cortisol curves I look at from clients, it's too high at some point during the day and too low at some point during the day, which means you probably might be that woman who you're like, I am not hungry in the morning. I'm not hungry all day long. And then suddenly at night, I am just like eating everything and just feel out of control. That could be that your hunger and fullness cues are completely off because your cortisol is flipping from high to low throughout the day. So that's a big one. And then the double whammy here is when we add in the fact that cortisol also impacts insulin, which is our essentially like the taxi for our blood sugar. And so essentially it like kind of pushes insulin aside because cortisol kind of like takes priority there. So think of it like if you get out of a really busy concert. Let's say you go to like Taylor Swift concert, best time of your life. You get out.
T-Swift.
You get out of the concert venue. You're like, cool, let's order an Uber. Boom. There are no Ubers available. Like you place an order for an Uber and it's just like, waiting for somebody to pick up. Yeah, like you waiting forever and ever. That's what's happening. Your blood sugar is like, okay, waiting for the taxi, waiting for insulin. It's not coming. So what happens? Our blood sugar gets really high. We start to find that we're having now these just like blood sugar dysregulation where we're having these swings, which causes a lot of sugar cravings. Your body starts to tell you to reach for the quick, easy carbs because it needs that to kind of, again, help fuel your body through these stressful periods. Then on top of that, we're now in this period of like undereating, overeating. Your adrenals are getting taxed. The adrenal gland is what produces cortisol. So now as the adrenal glands are getting taxed, your body's like, oh, we need more minerals. We need salt. We need sodium. So now you're having these salt cravings. So it's like you feel like this, like, I don't know, this monster where you're like, I have suddenly like this like huge pang of hunger, but I specifically want the sweets and the salty things. And suddenly you're like, just like face deep in a bag of chips and you're like, what the heck just happened to me?
I'm picturing you just with a bag of chips, just like looking up like
no hands, just like straight with your face. But yeah, like that's cortisol. There you go. So that's a big one for sure. But I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, you are going to find that you're going to end up with a little bit more of a propensity for insulin resistance, which is really, really huge for blocking your ability to burn body fat. If you are insulin resistant, you're not going to lose body fat no matter how much of a calorie deficit you put yourself in. It's just your body's not burning stored fat because you are just running on sugar. You're burning sugar all day long because the insulin isn't actually taking the sugar where it needs to be. You're a sugar burner at that point.
Can I add something? And again, not to go into too big of a rabbit hole, but I mean, this in itself, to be totally honest, it sounds so complex and people are like, oh my gosh, there's so many things I have to keep an eye on and this and that. And then think of the people too, because we get a lot of people that are dealing with like Hashimoto's, thyroid issues, PCOS. I mean, they're already dealing with a whole set of issues in themselves. Now you add this to the mix, like, of course, nothing's going to happen. And I think it becomes such a big problem if you don't treat it or at least manage it correctly, Yeah.
Well, all these different systems of the body talk to each other. They all influence each other. So it's not even to say like, oh, your cortisol is, affecting your thyroid or your thyroid's affecting your cortisol. It's both. They're going both ways. Huh. So it's like that's where you find it's super common for women to have multiple things going on. And you can't really even say which was, was it the chicken or the egg? It's just like you have a lot of things going on. We have to take care of all of it.
Yeah. Because even too, like sometimes we'll get comments or questions about like, inflammation or like water retention. I can imagine that's probably impacted too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's another point I wanted to make as well. So cortisol in and of itself as a hormone, it does create inflammation.
Okay.
At its core, like again, your body is very intelligently designed. Everything has a function and a purpose. So cortisol being, when your body is under stress, like if you have an injury, like your body's kind of releasing cortisol, bringing inflammation to the area to help the area repair. It's kind of turning on the immune system. Now, if we are chronically high cortisol, it's just like inflammation. Like,
I like inflammation.
Your immune system is just like rocking and rolling. It is going. And so over the course of time, just like how we were saying that your kind of adrenal glands will eventually like burn out. That's where that term adrenal fatigue comes from. Kind of the same thing with your immune system. Just like no part of your body is meant to just like run endlessly without eventually burning out. So now your immune system just continues to run, and that's where you can end up with what is sometimes labeled like an overactive immune system, which creates another host of issues. That was something I also was dealing with quite a bit. Was I found that my cellular inflammation was so deep probably from the high cortisol output that I had for a long time, to where I was so puffy and swollen all the time. Like even as I lost body weight initially, I still looked really puffy for a period of time. I was so inflamed. And so that's where a lot of women, like I see this a lot even in women who haven't really like put on that much body fat, but they're just like, I just look puffy. Like that's inflammation.
Or we get people that are like, my face is just so round, or my face is, just puffy and inflamed, which is just crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I feel like I could even continue on this of like all the ways that cortisol impacts your body and how that ultimately ladders up to making fat loss difficult. But these were like the main points that I wanted to make, because I think these are the most just like important things for you to understand to make sure that you know how your body is actually working. And you have that knowledge and you can advocate for yourself and your body because of it. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that you guys are walking away with a deeper understanding of the cortisol hormone, not just seeing it as like this trendy thing on Instagram, and actually seeing it as something that you understand how it works in your body. And you can, of course, utilize all the other resources that we have to help you get your hormones fully balanced. One of those being, if you are listening to this episode the day it comes out, tonight we are doing our free Women's Hormone and Metabolism Masterclass, where we're going to teach you step by step how to get your hormones in balance. We're really going to dive into the process that we take our clients through to get hormones back in balance, especially hormones like cortisol, and make sure that you are in a place to lose body fat. But if you're listening to this after the fact, we can probably get you the replay. So shoot me a message on Instagram if this is after the day that this episode came out.
Which is July 22nd.
Yeah, so if you listen to this beyond July 22nd, 2024, just shoot me a message on Instagram. You can DM me the word Masterclass, and I will get you the recording. Otherwise, if you're listening to this the day of, you can still get in. So look for the link in the description. That should be www.vanessapozos.com/hormone masterclass. And you can go ahead and get registered so that you can attend live, where you're going to get some extra freebies as well.
And it's going to be today, July 22nd at 6 p.m. Eastern time.
Yes. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So if you can make it live, would love for you to be there. You're going to get the most out of it because we are giving away some huge bonuses. You're going to get our hormone healing blueprints. You have like exact step-by-step things to put into place walking away from that call. And then you're also going to get a surprise bonus that is worth over $5,000. So you probably should join. Would love to see you there. But thank you guys so much for listening. As always, share this with a friend. Give us a 5-star rating and review. Like, really, we ask that you just give back or pay it forward in some way so that we can spread more quality information and knowledge out there. Hit subscribe, and we'll be back next week with another great episode.
Bye, you guys.